Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about replaying Diablo. I'm not talking about Diablo 4 or 3 or 2. I've been playing the original Diablo. Why have I been playing the original Diablo? I will tell you at the end of this video. Not because I want any sense of suspense, but I think it won't make sense until I tell you all the things that I noticed playing Diablo. So let's get into that. First of all, this game holds up really well for coming out in 1996 and being, I think it's 640, 480. I wonder if it's 320, 200. It's lower res by today's standards, but it is very good looking. It is a very good looking game. It's also got great music. So if you haven't heard the original Diablo music, it's really good. It has VO on, admittedly, a very small cast of NPCs, but they have VO. It also has a very minimal HUD. If you play it, it's just got that bar at the bottom. You can bring up all kinds of pop-ups for things like your character sheet or your inventory. But most of the time, it's just, here's a big screen with a little strip at the bottom. It's fun to play. One thing I wanted to bring up is that the dungeons in Diablo, in the original Diablo, are procedural dungeons. In other words, they are randomly generated every time you play. There are 16 levels to the dungeons. You have to play down through the bottom. They get harder as they go down, but each one also has a theme. There are dungeons, there are caves, there are fire levels. And these things are just generated randomly. Even the monsters, the named monsters, are generated randomly. You won't always see them. And if you do see them, you won't see them in the same place. Although what's weird is every single time I've played this game, including this morning, I keep seeing the Butcher on level 3. So I wonder if he appears, he's always on level 3. And also, I've always seen the Butcher. But rest assured, these named monsters are randomized. Now, one interesting thing about them is the rooms they appear in are always identical. I think, at least with the Butcher it was. He's always in the same room, but he's embedded in a randomized level. So you literally don't know that he's coming up until you reach a room that's a certain kind of size and the inside is decorated a certain way. You know it's him. This is, I think, an interesting combination of procedural and handmade. In fact, I made a video about that. And this is 28 years old. So I love how they handmade some encounters because they knew it would have impact. But then they put it in a randomized dungeon. It's really cool. By the way, I totally cheesed him when he showed up. He slaughtered me. And then I tried again and he slaughtered me. But then I realized I can shoot through some of the walls in the dungeon he was on. They were like they look like a portcullis, like slats. But the door into the room that had that slatted wall, I could close. And for some reason, the Butcher doesn't seem to have opposable thumbs, or he just doesn't know how to open a door. So I opened his door, shot him with an arrow. I was playing Madeira, the archer, and then rogue, I guess. And then I ran through that door, slammed it shut, and then just shot him through the slatted wall as he walked up and down, going, Yes, it was super cheesy. No, I didn't feel like a big hero, but I did feel like a winner when he died. And I got all the stuff, which I'll talk about in a minute, because when you do something for a quest, Reward Central, the jackpot is provided. Now, the really cool thing about how they do procedural dungeons is it makes the game really replayable. I forget how many times I played Diablo when it first came out, but here we are in 2024, and I'm playing this 1996 game again, and while I have knowledge of it, it's not overly helpful because every dungeon level is randomized, and I don't always get the same quests, and I don't always see the same named creatures. So this game has a ton of replayability in that regard, and I love it. Now, yes, their procedural generation causes some wonkiness. I took the stairs down from level 7 to level 8 and appeared right next to the stairs on level 8 going down to level 9, which means there are these two staircases. They were just generated right next to each other. Now, I could have gone down the stairs, but every time you go down stairs, everything becomes harder. Yes, the treasure's better, but there are more monsters of certain types, and there are new monsters that are harder that are introduced, and of course named monsters. So I wasn't ready, so I explored all of level 8 before I went down those stairs. But you notice things like that, just weirdness, stuff like chests that are empty, rooms that are empty, and you're like, something could have gone in here, but random generation. Now, I mentioned the quests earlier because you get quests to do the named monsters. The quests are randomized, meaning they don't always show up. The only ones that aren't randomized, I think, are the last two that are in the game. But all the others are randomized. Now, what's cool about doing them, though, is if you do a quest in Diablo, you get a unique item. Now, unique items are magical, and they're colored differently, and I'm talking about that. Magic items, normal items are white. Magical items are blue. I had to look that up. And they can contain up to 2 bonuses, but you have to get them identified, which costs money. But unique items can have up to 6 bonuses, and I think you always get a unique item when you finish a quest, which is a really strong encouragement to do a quest, because you get a magic item that's arguably better, and if it's something you can use, you probably want it. So it's a really incentive to do their quests. Now, there are some things that do feel dated about Diablo, and I'm not even going to talk about graphics. I still think it's beautiful, but let's talk about things like there's no real dialogue. There are no dialogue trees. When someone wants to tell you something and you click on them to access their store or to get healed, they will just pop up a dialogue box and just argue it. They just talk at you. You don't accept the quest. You don't acknowledge anything. If it's gossip, he goes through it and then boom, it's over. If it's a quest, he goes through it and then boom, you've accepted it. You don't have any choice. It's not real dialogue. And then, despite there being weapon durability in the game, and as I mentioned, you have to buy things like potions and to recharge staves that have spells in them, and to identify unidentified weapons. You can use them if they're not identified, but if you want to know what they're doing, you've got to get them identified. All that costs money. Despite that, you always accumulate more and more and more gold, which also has a stack limit. Once you get more than 5,000, it creates a new stack in your inventory, and your inventory is bounded by size. It's a grid. So once you get a lot of gold, you literally can't carry as many items. So I start doing this weird cheat where I just dump gold in the town. Nobody ever steals it. It just sits there on the ground. So when you go to town, if you don't have enough money to buy something that you want, you just run over to your gold pile and grab it. It's a weird thing, but there you go. Also, I mentioned those awesome quest rewards with the 6 bonuses, max bonuses versus the 2 that you normally get. Well, there's no guarantee you can use it. Every class, there are 3 classes, but every class can use any item if they have their stats high enough. And the classes come with different stat bonuses and do have stat maximums. So usually what happens is that something will drop that you can't use because your stat isn't high enough. Sometimes you can raise your stat high enough to get it. Sometimes you can't. But I remember a great quest reward I got for recovering this anvil for Griswold, the blacksmith. And he rewarded my archer with a sword. Now, I only use bows. So what am I going to do with the sword? Yeah, it's a really good sword, but I'm never going to use it. So I just sold it for a lot of money, which then I had to dump because it created literally 3 stacks. It was like 13,000 gold. So it made 3 stacks of gold in my inventory, which I then had to go dump on the ground. Also, I mentioned that items were colored. There are no colorblind accessibility options. In fact, I don't think there's any accessibility options at all. The items to me, though, were differentiatable. They looked white, gray, and tan. However, when I looked them up, they're white, blue, and gold. When I played the game, I could see the blue was blue, but the gold still looked tan to me, 20-some years ago. Now, white, gray, tan. But I could tell them apart. So now, finally, you're probably sitting there going, why is he talking about this? Why am I talking to you about a 28-year-old game? Got several reasons. First, if you only play recent games, then you're restricting yourself massively, not only in fun, but in learning the craft of making video games. There's a lot you can learn from older games. I made a video about, procedural content, and here's a 28-year-old game doing it well. And you could learn how it did it and apply it maybe to one of your own games. I also had a video about playing my older games and things I learned and things I didn't. You can learn that from any older game. So don't restrict yourself. By the way, too, if you only play recent games, you will learn a lot about fads. You will learn a lot of features that are fads. Fads come and go. Fads are almost impossible to predict. There's no way you can guess, oh, I bet people are going to want this in the next game until some game does it. It's super popular. Suddenly everybody wants to do it. However, if you go back and play a range of games, new and old, now you suddenly learn about trends. You are noticing what came and went, the fads, but you're learning what came and stuck, the trends. And trends are a lot more predictable than fads. So if you want to know what maybe you should put in your game, and you look at games that were doing things 5 or 6 years ago, and not only are a lot of games doing it now, but it's still around, maybe it's a trend and not a fad, and you should consider adding that as a feature in your game. However, a big caveat, which you can learn by playing Diablo, is you don't need every feature in every game you make. Diablo didn't have tons of NPCs. They didn't have conversation trees. Those existed back then, but they didn't need it. In fact, I've mentioned that when Diablo came out in 96, maybe I haven't, but I'll mention it here. When Diablo came out in 96 and Fallout was still a year away from shipping, I had to defend Fallout to marketing, which came to me and pretty much said, you have to add real-time combat and you have to have multiplayer in Fallout. Look at Diablo. And I was like, look at all the things we have that Diablo doesn't. And they didn't want to hear it. They basically were saying, you have to do this. So I did what any good producer would do, and I made a new schedule and a new budget based on their requests and submitted it to them for approval. And that was the last time I ever heard about real-time and multiplayer in Fallout. So, anyway, I highly recommend you play older games. There's a lot to learn there, and they're still super fun. So, try it out. I guarantee you're going to have some fun and learn a few things.